Okay, let's get started. So before we dive into our conversation, I just want to go over some ground rules. So if everyone can stay on mute until we prompt for questions, that would be great, just so we don't have any interference in the conversation. Show video if you're able. I know it's weird that we can't all be there in person together, and hopefully soon we will, but for now, at least we can see each other's faces, which would be great. And if you have questions before the question portion of the fireside chat, please just put them into the chat box, and Marissa from our team will be monitoring that. And so the simple agenda of this conversation will be Craig and I will be talking until about 12:45, and then there will be 10 minutes of questions from the group, and then we'll go over some closeout items. So I'd like to formally welcome everyone to our first event of the Careers in Affordable Housing Fireside Chat. My name is Anna Cole, and I'm a member of the Silicon Valley at Home Coalition of Housers Working Group, and we are hosting all the COHO events. This is our first event, but we will have many more coming up, and we'll mention some of those at the end. So the Coalition of Housers, otherwise known as COHO, is a network of new and emerging leaders working in and advocating for affordable housing in the South Bay. The goal of COHO is to support the leadership and professional development of a diverse community of practitioners in the affordable housing industry and among industry partners. Shout out to Marissa and Dixie on the Careers in Affordable Housing team within COHO, and Kriti for supporting us and making this first event possible, and the whole working group as well. So thank you all for joining. Let's go over our poll results first so we can kind of get a sense of who's in the room. Looks like we have a few students. We have a good amount of people who are currently working in the housing field, so that's 0 to 6 years. And we have a few more experienced people. And most people are somewhat knowledgeable about the affordable housing field, but we also have some newbies, and we also have some professionals who have been here a while. So welcome everyone, we're really excited to have you. So today, in our first of the Careers in Affordable Housing Fireside Chat series, we welcome Craig Mizushima, the Chief Compliance and Risk Officer of Housing Trust Silicon Valley. Craig joined Housing Trust in April 2018. Among other programs, Housing Trust Silicon Valley partners with developers to help finance and invest in affordable housing construction and development. In the role of Chief Compliance and Risk Officer, he leads Housing Trust Asset Management Department, as well as oversees its enterprise risk management activities to help guide Housing Trust future growth. Welcome, Craig.
Thank you.
So first, if you could provide a short introduction, where you live, where you came from, and 3 words to describe you.
Okay. I live in San Jose on the north side. Actually, I live in Japantown. I've been in California for all of about 2.5 years. I'm originally from Chicago, where I spent my entire life and career in Chicago, and most of the career always in community development. I've been very fortunate to have a number of different career opportunities, both in government, in banking, in nonprofits and CDFIs, and it's been a pleasure to develop my career and to be able to share that with you today. 3 words to describe me. You know, I don't know if it's 3 individual words, but as much as I just have always enjoyed meeting new people, being a sponge for more information, and working hard.
That's perfect. And then if you could also, I gave the formal introduction of your job, but if you could kind of give that in layman's terms, maybe people who aren't as familiar with the industry.
Sure. So the Housing Trust has a portfolio of loans. You know, we make generally short-term loans to support multifamily affordable housing throughout the greater metropolitan or the greater Bay Area. We also have a first-time homebuyers program, and we have a program that addresses homelessness. So all things housing in different degrees. My job is really to look over, manage the asset management department. Also overseeing our Finally Home, which is our homelessness prevention program. And what's really been new to my own career has been the chief risk officer for the organization as well. It became clearly apparent that as we were growing significantly, there were a lot of questions as to how the Housing Trust is managing risk. And that was a critical factor, not only to from our funders, our bankers, our partners, and our investors, that managing as we grow to become a much, much larger organization, how we manage risk has been a critical factor. So I've really enjoyed being involved on that side.
Great, thank you. And then if you could just talk about your career path to end up here from the beginning and why you ended up in housing in the Bay Area.
Ah, okay. So my background, having grown up in Chicago, was really and has always been in urban planning and public policy. I've really enjoyed that, going back really to the early 80s. And I've been fortunate to be involved in a number of different things, in the very early aspects, when the Community Reinvestment Act was first passed in 1977, to being involved in financing the very first LIHTC deal in the city of Chicago, and the way those were being looked at. In government, I was involved in many of the CDBG funding, and much of my career early on was in economic development. And it was always in public finance in some degree, but it also always touched commercial real estate. And so I headed up and started the City of Chicago's tax increment financing program, which was subsequently just got bigger and bigger. And so I'm really proud of, being involved in many of the early financing vehicles that cities enjoy today. The first enterprise zones in the city of Chicago, as well as the first federal empowerment zones the city of Chicago was involved in, and I had a strong role in obtaining those particular programs as well. As my career progressed, I began to focus more on affordable housing, commercial real estate activities, and affordable housing in particular, and really enjoyed oftentimes the complexity and the challenges of that type of financing. For many of you, I'm not sure you necessarily can appreciate all the things that you do and the ability to affect people's lives. Many organizations put out impact statements, and they talk about the number of units developed or the number of people affected. But the thing that really hits home and should hit home for all of us is that within all those housing units are people, and there are parents, there are ourselves, our children and grandchildren. And, but for the things that we do in affordable housing, many of those individuals won't have a place to live. And, sometimes in California, while we always talk about the need, we see the impact all the time. And, we're very fortunate to have sources of money, oftentimes throughout our community. Oftentimes you could also argue that it's not enough. But, for much of my entire career largely has been spent in the Midwest. And I managed the community development lending for 7 Midwestern states, including Michigan, Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, Minnesota, and Missouri. And to be able to see, the poverty that exists in many communities, they don't have access to funds to develop. And the fact that the disparity between market rate rents and affordable rents, or 60% rents, are so compressed that you really can't oftentimes tell the difference between affordable housing and market rate housing. In the Bay Area, you know, there's a much, much bigger contrast. What brought me to California, you know, I was semi-retired in the Midwest, and my daughter had moved to San Francisco for finishing up graduate school in advertising. And in coming out here, this opportunity with the Housing Trust came up, and I was really, really fortunate to be able to be introduced to the organization and had an opportunity to be involved in its growth. So my daughter subsequently has moved to New York City for her career, but I'm still here and loving the weather, despite the fires that we have. I wish it would rain a little bit more often, I guess is the one thing I would say, but I just absolutely love the weather here. And I get it. It's really the lifestyle and it's the weather and a lot of things.
I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about your transition from being in the Midwest to here, and maybe some more specifics on the needs that you were meeting in the Midwest relative to the needs in a more specific sense that you're meeting here.
You know, I think the biggest difference here, well, the incredible need, but also I'll have to say that, you know, the challenges of having to compete with market rate housing is one of the biggest challenges that exist in particularly the Bay Area. I don't have as much experience throughout the Central Valley or Southern California, but in most communities throughout the Midwest, you know, you don't have that big of a gap. You know, people in the Midwest, they come out of school and they have their first job, and with that first job, they're getting their first apartment. Here in California, you know, you finish school and either you continue to live at home or you create small pods of friends for housing. And in fact, you know, even people that I know in larger group that could afford their own home, there's a lifestyle change in which people continue to live in groups and have roommates. And so that's something different. And I won't say it's necessarily unique to California because I see it in New York as well, but particularly in the Midwest where land is plentiful, you know, apartments tend to be much more affordable. And so that's a big difference. The cost of development here is enormous. You know, you could buy a fairly decent single family home for under $200,000 in many parts of the Midwest, you know, excluding the big city. Whereas here, you know, affordable housing, the cost of developing a single unit can be $650,000 to $900,000 a unit. And there's a lot of drivers to that, not only just the demand, but also the cost of development, the cost of labor and housing, and environmental conditions in general as well.
Yeah. So I'd also love to hear about things you love about your job, maybe one thing you're learning now, and just in general, why you stay in the career path that you're in.
Well, I have to say that I absolutely love my job. I love the people that I work with. Affordable housing in general, housers tend to have a mission commitment, and that to me always resonates because it gives us a unique bond. You know, for many of us, you know, we might have other opportunities and we chose our career path for a variety of different reasons. But the fact that we are having such a big impact on helping other people is laudable. And I love the fact that everyone that I work with, that in my career and within the organization, within the Housing Trust as well, shares that similar commitment. And that's what I really love about that, my job and the industry in general.
Yeah. What's something that you're currently learning now, or something you want to learn more about, just kind of in the theme of continuing to learn in your career throughout?
Well, the new activity for me in particularly and the organization is a more formal process on how we manage risk. I think every organization, regardless of who they work with, manages risk and figure out a way to be effective as to how they manage risk. But as the organization gets bigger, there's a requirement or a desire to formalize that process. And whether that process involves, kind of a balance between how we're funded and the funding matches between the sources and the uses of how we utilize the funds that are provided. How we always have sufficient amount of money to fund the activities that we're doing becomes increasingly important. And for many of our funders, it's become an incredibly important component as to how we manage that risk. They want to, if they're going to invest in the housing trust, they want to make sure that we're in it for the long haul. They want to make sure that we, in fact, are going to manage their money appropriately, and oftentimes that involves just providing conversations, but a formal process to making sure that we're managing it.
That's great. So then kind of back to the beginning of your career path and more advice to a younger you, what are some things that you would need to get here today? Or what are some things that you would advise maybe the younger audience here today?
So I'm not sure that I would give the same advice to this group that I would give that I had when I was younger. When I was first starting my career, my mother and father, said, you're starting your career. The advice that they always gave me was that I needed to be in the office before my boss and never leave until after they've left. Interestingly, when I started to be having more senior roles and managers, they gave me the advice that I should always be the first one in the office as a manager and the last one to leave. So it's always kind of worked against me. I have to tell you, though, that what I really appreciate, and as my career has developed, is a better appreciation for the importance of work life. That, from a mental standpoint, from a fulfillment in terms of, what we do, that balance is incredibly important. We have to spend time with our family and friends, and we have to really make time for ourselves. And that's been a critical piece that was missing perhaps early in my career. And I wish I had better advice in that respect. And then the other career, I should say, is be a mentor. Work with other people that perhaps aren't as experienced with you as you, work with other individuals perhaps coming out of school, giving them advice, and whatever you're committed to doing, be an expert in what you do. It's not really just the task at hand that's important, but it's really developing our own understanding so that we can contribute to making something better.
I'm interested in you mentioning the mentorship aspect. Did you have a mentor that helped you get to where you are? And could you discuss that a little bit?
Yeah, early on, and I think the biggest mentors are the people that are committed to community development. But I worked for a social service agency in the mid-'80s, and with an individual that had grown up in a very low-income community called the Back of the Yards on the south side of Chicago. And while he had grown up there, he became the executive director and the CEO. And he really mentored me, in terms of taking my hand, helping me to understand how to get things done. Sometimes navigating through the political process that could be very complicated in the city of Chicago. And sometimes, they're not necessarily always written, but it's an incredible learning experience in terms of, understanding that it's just as important to involve the political process, whether it was a city council individual and making sure that they had recognition in order to make the organization successful, the political, whether it was a senator or a legislator or a congressman, that they were important for the organization's growth. And so those were things that, you could say, well, I underwrote that particular loan, and gee, I really made that happen. But early on, I learned that, it comes back to, multiple numbers of times when you could acknowledge the people, the old adage, and I know it's overused, that it takes a village, truly is true. No matter how hard we work, no matter how long that we individually may work on a project and feel really good about it, it really does take a lot of people involved in a project to be successful. And never forget that, and acknowledging all the people involved. And that may include, the youngest, newest member that might be interning with the organization, providing support, but it also involves the senior leadership within the organization as well.
And again, with some advice to, especially, particularly our students and maybe our early stage professionals who are here today, what are some entry-level job paths that you'd recommend people experience if they think they want to enter this field, and particularly the finance side of housing?
Sure. I will say that, the finance aspect, while there's some individuals that are somewhat uncomfortable with it, it's applicable to no matter what organization that you're working with. And, particularly if you're in college, do a lot of internships. Do an internship in a nonprofit organization or a CDFI. Work in government as a beginning position. All these things really give you a different perspective about how decisions are being made, and then really being a sponge and learning, how and what needs to be done to make a project happen, whether it's affordable housing or an economic development function as well. Those are skills, incredibly valuable skill sets that will carry you through a lifetime. And then I will say that keep contact with the people that you work with. Whether if you're a student now, all the people, particularly if you're in an urban development or an urban planning program, those people are going to be somewhere in the next 20 years. And keeping in contact with those individuals, sharing stories, sharing experiences is not only going to make you better, but also develop your career as well. So making sure that, you get as much experience as you can early in your career, and then maintaining professional contacts and friendships, personal relationships will really help people develop.
That's great. And then finally, before we go into questions from the group, what are some resources you'd recommend aside from this chat for people to get more information about the work you do and maybe even networking in the field?
So, obviously the Housing Trust has its own website, but I encourage everyone to be involved in organizations and attend different events. Networking is incredibly important, but many organizations such as SV at Home with NPH, SPUR, they have many, many training programs as well Affordable Housing Week in the spring, particularly in Santa Clara County. I think it's one of the best affordable housing weeks in the Bay Area. And I think Affordable Housing Week actually lasts 2 or 3 weeks, you know, in Santa Clara County. But it's an incredible place to not only meet people, but also an incredible place to learn and be exposed to different things in the span of a relatively short period of time. And it gets chances to meet other people within the organization, and the whole thing where I talked about maintaining relationships to the extent, it's certainly a lot harder virtually to maintain those relationships, but certainly, you know, this isn't going to last forever. And whenever, you know, we begin to start attending events in person, I encourage you to do that and bring your business cards and be a collector of cards or, you know, electronic contacts, because, you know, it'll help you in the long run.
That's great. Thank you. It's been really nice speaking with you, and I'm looking forward to hearing some questions from the group. So I think we'll open it up.
Thank you.
Marissa?
Yeah, we've got one question so far. Ingrid, did you want to unmute yourself to ask out loud, or did you want me to read it out loud?
Yeah, I mean, I'll read it out loud. I mean, I'll read it out loud. I'll just ask it. Sorry. I think what I'm trying to ask is, like, given the pandemic and just the changes in affordable housing and developments, what do you think? I mean, from a personal perspective, I'm a community engagement specialist, and I'm not really doing much in community or engagement. So I've been working on a lot of other factors, right? And everything's turning to this virtual platform. But I constantly think to myself, like, how much affordable development are we really going to be continuing to do, you know, within the foreseeable future? Do you think that there's any focus, like, you've been in this field longer to know, like, how do you change your career or your focus given, like, the changes that are happening in the market, you know, whether it's a recession or a pandemic or anything like that?
You know, the fact that California is the only place that I really know that people are actually willing to vote for a tax increase to fund affordable housing. I can tell you nowhere in the Midwest would anyone actually do that. And that's a testimony, I think, to the commitment that people have in California and in the Bay Area. It's also a testament to the fact that people recognize the need. You know, so many jobs are being created in Silicon Valley and in the Bay Area, but at the same time, the number of housing units in general that are being created is a fraction of the number of jobs being created. And then when you carry that forward, when you talk about the entire industry, that the need for affordable housing becomes that much more critical, because you're competing. Affordable housing development is competing with market rate housing, unlike anything that I've ever seen before. And so, you know, staying the course, you know, having that commitment is incredibly important. And, you know, that commitment exists within government, it exists within the county, it exists within the state. And while you could feel like it's never enough money, I guess stay the course and stay at it, because it's an exciting field to be in there. And someday, you know, you'll be looking back, or you'll be on a similar fireside chat talking about your own careers, you know, 30, 40, 50 years from now, and talking about the challenges and how they were addressed. So hang in there, but it is a tough challenge.
Well, thank you. At least that keeps you motivated through the pandemic. Yeah,
you know, I will say it's a challenge, but you know what? We've all adjusted. You know, I'm amazed, you know, how we've been able to work at home and still be effective in what I never thought we would be able to do before. I think it's creating a new business model for all of us.
Yeah, going off of that new business model, I believe Tammy had a question. Tammy, did you want to join in?
Sure. Hi, I'm Tammy Strauss. I have about 30 years of experience in community development and affordable housing. I moved here from Connecticut this past summer, which is crazy, right? And I'm just trying to, now that we're settled in, I'm just trying to learn the lay of the land and see what's going on. And this is a question I had in Connecticut at the beginning of the pandemic, and I have it here. And that is, do you think we'll see a conversion of office buildings to residential use, thus increasing the supply of housing, which would put kind of downward pressure on rental rates for market rate housing? And what does, and how does that impact the residential supply and what we're going to see for demand for market rate and affordable housing?
So I'm not sure that, in all honesty, that we're going to see a conversion of office buildings. I do think that offices and commercial users of these properties are rethinking their business model, and maybe they can put more people within it. But there's a very entrepreneurial spirit here that exists in Silicon Valley and in the Bay Area in general that keeps capital within the area and keeps them expanding. Perhaps the expansion of offices might slow down a little bit, but it doesn't change the fact that there's already this incredible need for housing, and it's still going to be competing for the growth, albeit somewhat slower perhaps, for commercial office space as well.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Yeah, and I think we have another question. Carlino, did you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the talk. I was wondering, what is one governmental or structural change regarding affordable housing that you want to see in the next 10 to 15 years? What would make your job easier?
So I'd have to say the number one is increasing density in the Bay Area. Everybody goes up, but it's San Jose, is relatively flat, and the Bay Area, with a few exceptions, and I say relatively flat. But when you look at different communities throughout the Midwest and the rest of the country, density, particularly, they either have excess land, and so they could build and accommodate new development. But in California, where we don't have excess land, increasing the density is a critical piece. And the other piece that I would strongly encourage government to encourage is more public transportation. We have, I think somebody told me once that there's probably 30 to 35 separate transportation bodies that govern, beyond just BART and VTA and Caltrain. There are individual bus trains. And so I think there needs to be some centralization and coordination of public transportation, and building housing around transportation hubs would go a long way. California is still kind of a driver's market, and that doesn't exist necessarily in a lot of other big cities in the Bay Area.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question. Anyone?
I could follow up if no one else has another question.
Sure.
I guess the recent legislation regarding ADUs in California, obviously that helps increase density. Do you see that as a good first step, or is it kind of a distraction from real increases to density?
I think it's an incredibly important piece to solving the puzzle, because when you think about development in general, historically, you kind of push out where there's excess land. And when you do that, you're pushing further and further away from the central city, and you have to develop an infrastructure that supports that. You're building new roads, new police and fire stations, you're building water and sewers, whereas ADUs really are taking advantage of the existing infrastructure. It takes advantage of the existing transportation system, the schools and the parks, and it could be an incredibly important tool to solving the issues. It's certainly much more affordable, and I would love to see that as a product develop. I know the Housing Trust is working on a particular financing product to address that, but across the board, many communities are looking toward ADUs and to see how that can help address some of the issues of housing. But I have to say that, you know, there's no single tool. You know, cities or municipalities have to look at multiple different avenues if they want to be successful and address these. And that includes multifamily housing, in certain instances, more higher density single family housing as well.
Great, thank you everyone. And thank you so much, Craig, again, for joining us for the first of this series. It was wonderful hearing about your experience and learning more about you.
I was going to just say thank you for having me. This is an incredibly important forum for all of us to get together. And please feel free to reach out to me at any time. I try to make myself available to anyone at any time to talk about their careers in particularly, but just their challenges and work experiences.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll add Craig's, put Craig's email in the chat box right now if anyone's interested in following up. So thank you again. And then coming up next for co-host, so our next event is scheduled for October 22nd. It's going to be an interactive discussion on redlining and displacement, and we're really excited. So everyone stay tuned for more information on that. We would love for you to join again. And then we're going to have another event in this series, Careers in Affordable Housing. Details to be determined, but I think we're going to be having a chat with a developer next time. So also keep posted for that. And then Marissa or Kriti are posting the post-event survey in the chat right now. And so that's just to get a read from you guys on how this went, if there's anything you want more of, anything you want less of, so that we can improve this going forward. So thank you again for everyone joining us, and thank you, Craig.
Thank you.